Hivin and Vibin with Dr. Bibi.
Hey guys, how have you all been? This is Hivin and Vibin with Dr. Bibi, and today we have How Do You Lead? We have with us as our guest Paul Sansom. Paul is a globally experienced CEO with a diverse background in large multinational organizations where he has worked across Europe, Africa, and Australia. We have a rich experience with us today. With a proven track record of sustainable transformation in complex businesses, Paul has expertise in leading culture and performance change. He has a passion for people development and succession planning and has represented various boards and worked directly with the government on industry policy and international trade. Paul has a strong reputation as a global leader, attracting top talent and building diverse leadership teams. He has a rare combination of a transformational and servant leadership style with a clear people first approach. He has led 3.5 billion revenue businesses in Australia across 6 sites and 600 people with a distribution model of 180 group retail sites employing over 18,000 people under a franchise agreement. We need to talk a lot about this. He has also worked in businesses in Europe and Africa with various Volkswagen Group brands, Jaguar Cars, and Royal Bank of Scotland NatWest Leasing Division. Paul volunteers as the honorary CEO of our Big Kitchen in Sydney, providing over 5,000 hot meals per week for those in need. Paul has a certificate in business sustainability from Cambridge University and is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Welcome, Paul, to Hivin and Vibin with Dr. Bibi.
Well,
How do you lead?
thank you, Dr. Bibi. What a great welcome. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, this is a great opportunity for us to learn from you. You know, we need to sieve all your knowledge, all your wisdom so that it helps us. So thank you for being here to share your knowledge and wisdom with us.
It's a great pleasure. Looking forward to it.
I will begin by asking a question on your voluntary work that you're doing as the honorary CEO of our Big Kitchen in Sydney. How did that start? And, when did you begin working? Tell us more about the story behind it.
Sure. Well, thanks for starting there. I think that's a great starting point. So it actually, that came about just after I left my last corporate role, which was around 2.5 years ago. And I was wondering what was next, and I was sitting at home thinking, well, I need to make some use of my time, and I thought I'll do some volunteering. And my son had been to our Big Kitchen with his school, and they'd done some work there, and he talked about it, and I knew about it. It's in Bondi. It's very close to where I live. So I just wandered in there as a volunteer, and essentially what our Big Kitchen does, it produces hot chef prepared or chef standard meals every day for people that need it on the streets of Sydney. And we do about 250,000 meals a year. So it's a big operation. So the kitchen is like an industrial kitchen. We rely on volunteers and corporate team building events to bring people in and produce the meals. So I went in as a volunteer, and I was peeling carrots, I was chopping potatoes, and the founder came over, and he makes a habit of talking to everyone that comes in. And he said, Paul, what's your story? What's your background? So I described, what I've been doing and where I was at. And I think it was actually an indication of my chopping and peeling capabilities. But he said, "Come with me. Let's take you out of the kitchen. Let's see what else you can do that might contribute to our Big Kitchen." And our Big Kitchen's been going for about 20 years. It's a wonderful not-for-profit operation that serves the needy. It serves two purposes. There's a shocking amount of food waste in the world, and particularly in Australia. Really good food that would have otherwise gone to waste. We save that, we get that, we bring it in, and then the second purpose is we feed the hungry. So it's kind of dual purpose: save as much of that waste, food that would have otherwise gone to waste, and use it to turn it into a really high quality meal that gives some dignity back to some people that are fallen on some hard times that that need a hot meal. So now I started working as he said within a few weeks I was made the honorary CEO, Dr. Bibi, which basically means you have all the responsibilities of running the operation, but there's no salary attached to it. So I'm a volunteer CEO, if you like, which is great. And I've been there a couple of years now. Love working with the team there. We've seen a lot of improvements going. We've invested in people, in IT, in marketing, and we're bringing in a lot more sort of, let's say, some operational rigor and capability and capacity, because we've revamped the kitchen so we can do even more meals, because the demand, unfortunately, is higher than ever, with people looking for a hot meal every day. So we've done a lot, and I really thoroughly enjoy it. Spend quite a bit of my weeks, or my time in my weeks, with the team there at our big kitchen. And for anyone that's listening to this and they want to volunteer, we always need some help. Yeah.
Lovely. How do you distribute this, the food, or is there some areas that you go to? How does that work?
Yeah, so sometimes when I talk about our big kitchen, people think of it like a soup kitchen where people come along and they eat their meal there. It's not that. We prepare the meals and then we distribute them. So your question's a really good one. And what we do is we go to the major charities, or they come to us, that can distribute it for us. So
Okay.
yeah, so they'll come in their in their vans in the afternoon about 3 or 4 o'clock, and they'll pick up a whole bunch of meals, and they'll take them back out to the street. So so Vinny, so Paul's might be a good example of Red Cross, or whoever it might be that we've got an association with, and we've got all the big charities that are in the area, and their local offices in Sydney. They come and they take our meals and they distribute them through their own facilities in the evening in Sydney. So that's how we distribute about 5,000 meals a week.
Yep, I was going through your introduction and I found it there. How different is being the CEO of our big kitchen to what you did earlier? And I know that you worked with cars, and I can, and you worked in a bank. So how different is it, and what are the similarities?
Yeah, great question. I've never really thought about that before, but look, it's I think leadership roles are sector agnostic. No matter what you're what you're doing, if you can come to a business or an organization, whether it's a not-for-profit charity or whether it's a huge multinational corporate, if you can bring with you some of the essentials of leadership, so being able to provide a vision, some clarity around that, a strategy, build the capability beneath that that's able to go on that journey from where you are today to where you want to get to, and do that in a way that really engages the people, all the stakeholders, particularly obviously the employees. If you can do that as a leader, then you're going to be pretty successful in whatever organization you work in. It's hugely different in many ways, but those principles I think are very transferable, and that's what the founder saw in me that first day when he saw me peeling potatoes, and he said, I think you can add some value in other areas. And that's exactly what we did. We sat down, we created a vision, we created a much more of a brand for our big kitchen that we can sort of use as the spine of everything that we do, in terms of how we recruit people, to how we market and commercialize the organization. IT stack, the IT stack that was there, actually, because a lot of people offered to help, was probably more complex than some of the multinationals that I've run. So we worked out what do we need to do, simply just to get more volunteers and to get more corporate team building events going on here, and create a simple CRM platform. Hiring great staff and training them and giving them real sense of purpose and an alignment to the cause. So it's really that sort of stuff that is very common, Banya, than that I experienced. The differences are, there was no board to answer to. There's a real sense of purpose in an organisation like our big kitchen that makes you really feel connected to doing something good for the community, and that feeling, that very human need for connection and helping others is extremely rewarding, and something that I tap into every time I go there, that I found more difficult to tap into in the corporate world, that's for sure.
Your leading style, you've spoken about a people first approach, and how did that come about? When did you realize that it had to be a people first approach? When was the first time you realized that you had the leader in you to do that?
Yeah, people first. I think it goes back to some very early beliefs that I had from a very young person. I've always believed in helping others. It's something that's just innate in me, and I like to think that I did that as a young child, and it was kind of therefore somehow in my belief system as I grew into an adult and then into leading other people. It was still there. It's always been there. Serving others is something that I just sort of believe in, not in any other way than, well, I'll give you an example. On my desk in my office that I carried around with me across 3 different continents was a quote, Banya, and I have to recall it now because I haven't sat at that desk for a couple of years, but it said, if serving is beneath you, leadership is beyond you. And I just loved that. It really resonated because I think all leaders essentially are serving the communities they're working in and for. And the people that work in an organization, that's the first priority. That's absolutely the first, even before the customer. Because if you don't get that bit right, then there's going to be an impact on your customer experience as well, which of course will have an impact on the bottom line ultimately. So getting the employee experience right is so essential, and for me it was like I cared a lot about that. I cared a lot about creating the right environment for people to thrive, and that's just been, and that wasn't always a popular way. When I started out in leadership, it was far more control and command and quite dictatorial. And I really railed against my personal value set, and I didn't enjoy it. I had some experiences working for people like that I just didn't enjoy at all, and I learned a lot from them about what not to do, as much as what I learned about what to do from other mentors and role models. So yeah, I think it's just been there right from the beginning. To be honest, Banya, it's been something that is part of my deep value set, and I've honoured it all the way through my career.
And how did your career begin? So I can see that various countries, at least 2 or 3 industries. So how did that happen?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know whether it's quite typical. I think it probably is when you finish your education, and for me anyway, I thought I was going to be a sportsman, because I was pretty good at sports back then, and I was thinking I might break through into the world of soccer, rugby, cricket, squash. I was particularly good. So I had all these things that I was pretty good at, but never really good enough to be a professional. Actually, never really even close enough to be a professional, if I'm really honest. But I was pretty good at them, and I kind of harbored these ambitions of doing that as a profession, but I didn't really know what I was going to do. And so I had a few jobs. I probably had half a dozen jobs where I just moved around quite quickly. Couldn't find a foothold. And my dad actually worked for a bank, and he worked for this financial institution pretty much whole of his life. And he came home one day, probably fed up with me sponging off him for his petrol money and rent and everything else. And he said, right, I've got you an application form for a different branch of where he worked altogether, but he knew someone, and he said, you're going for an interview. And it was actually in customer services in the bank, and it was one of the best things that happened to me. And I'm always eternally grateful to my dad for getting me on a sort of ladder where working for a bank gives you enormous opportunities to learn. A lot of principles that I learned there are still true today. They give you plenty of training and development. And I spent probably 10 years working for the same organization and was climbing the ladder quite well. That was the thing to do, wasn't it? That was what success was defined by back then in society. It was like climbing this corporate ladder. I was following in my dad's footsteps, thinking, this is cool. I was doing pretty well. And then I had this moment, it was the turn of the century, it was 2000, I remember it well, when I got headhunted. And I've never been headhunted before or since, but I got headhunted. So I was immediately, my ego was sort of going into overdrive, and I was like, oh, yeah. Someone wants me. This is great. And it was Jaguar cars. And you might think, how does banking and automotive sort of sit together? Well, actually, there's a huge overlap between banking and automotive in terms of funding of automotive businesses, of retail financing of cars, and not just cars, but trucks and buses and everything else. There's a huge crossover of funding and asset management, and that's kind of where I'd ended up in the bank, was asset management. So there was this crossover into Jaguar. So I went to Jaguar. Honestly, this is the true story. I went there because I actually love vintage cars or classic cars, and the Jaguar E-Type is one of my favorites. So, and they had a museum in Coventry in the UK where they held all these beautiful old Jaguars. And I went to the interview, no word of a lie, so I could get access to the museum. Now, you can get access as a public member anyway, you just have to pay £5. But I thought, well, I'll go to this interview because I can get into the museum, which I did. I had the interview, went to the museum, had a great day, went away. Anyway, they came back and offered me the job, which I didn't expect at all because I hadn't really prepared for the role. But somehow I got caught up in the magic of the Jaguar brand. It's very special in the UK, and it is globally. And I took the job, much to the chagrin of my parents and my friends and family, who all thought, what are you doing? You're throwing away a banking career and you're going into automotive. And anyway, I went into that, and 2 years down the line, I realized they were right and I was wrong. It was a bad move. And I thought, I can't lose face here. I have to find an automotive employer that's kind of the employer of choice and I can carve out my career in. And fortunately, I got a role in the Volkswagen Group, and that was in about 2003. And then I spent 20 plus years working for Volkswagen, 3 different continents, probably 9 different jobs in that time. So I was moving around a lot. I was moving through the ranks pretty quickly, and I had a wonderful time. Met some amazing people, dealt with some amazing products and brands, and obviously experienced so much of the world in doing that across Europe, Africa, and now Australia.
Okay, so here is a question on diversity. So you have worked in Europe, then in Africa, and then Australia. What are the differences in these 3 continents, and what are the similarities?
What are the differences? So Europe, I was working predominantly in the UK. A lot of time in Germany, a bit in Spain. You're working in the first world markets, very advanced, often the benchmark of most markets in the world. So the UK was in the automotive sense. It was a very mature market. You had some very highly skilled people there, and a lot of growth and development and skills and knowledge and experience was there. So I was coming up in a really strong environment. And when I contrast that to the move to Africa, suddenly I'm in the third world country, and there hadn't been so much advantage and hadn't been so much growth. It was a much younger, immature sort of marketplace. And part of the reason for sending someone like me there was to bring some of that, that experience to the market and help it mature, accelerate its maturation. But the market's got to be ready for that, and that's what I found quite. I went in and said, I've got all these great ideas, and we can implement this and that. But if the people and the market and the customers aren't quite ready for that, then you have to meet them where they're at and then bring them along. And that was what I learned. A big lesson for me was, you can't just parachute in somewhere and expect everything that worked in your previous environment to work in the new environment. So there's huge learnings for me in that space. And that's probably the closest I felt to failing in my career, was the first few months in Africa, because I felt really like I was a fish out of water, and what I knew and what I could offer wasn't really resonating, and there was just this disconnect that was really difficult, and it took that that sort of period of 6 months to acclimatize and recalibrate. But that, when I look back at that now, as much as that was painful and difficult, I look back at that learning now and that experience, and it was just wonderful. I wouldn't replace it for anything in terms of how it's developed my self and professional sort of capabilities. Was probably one of the fastest learning growths. And you hear that a lot, don't you? That you learn most about yourself in times of adversity, and that was a tough time. Also, at the same time, my wife was pregnant with our child, and we'd just moved to Africa. We hadn't got any sort of friends and infrastructure and so on. So I got a new job, a new home, a new baby, and no sort of scaffolding around you that you'd normally have if you were at home. So it was a challenging time, really challenging time. And of course, you're living in an environment that's very different from home as well. So politically, socially, economically, it was dramatically different to what I'd known, or only ever known, really, in Europe. So it was a huge adjustment, and it wasn't easy. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. I'm not going to say I've made a great success of it. I struggled through it, but I did make a success of it. I came out the other side after 3 or 4 years. When most people leave after it, you either succeed, you swim, or you sink. And the people that sink are normally in the first 3 to 6 months when they go on an assignment like that.
Tenacity.
Yeah. So, like I said, I learned a lot about my resilience and tenacity and willingness to work through the uncomfortable moments and the messy middles, and so huge credit to my wife and son as well, who came through that with me, and that was a great learning experience. It ended where we look back on that period now and think, well, there was some great times. We're looking back at it very fondly, as much as some of those trickier times. And then there was an opportunity to go from there to come to Australia. And Australia felt almost like home from home to the UK, but it's not. It's really not. There's a lot of UK people here. It's an English-speaking country. It's again back into the first world, but it's very different in terms of the way that it operates, in compared to what I'd just come from. For instance, was again a huge contrast, and I had 3 or 4 years sort of immersing myself in that to sort of switch gears again and move back into something quite different. And that takes its toll on you, and that takes its personal toll on you. And that's what I learned a lot about leadership is, I was so immersed in the business and in making a success of that, you sacrifice other things as well, for your own well-being and for the people that are closest to you. And you don't necessarily realize it at the time, but I can sit back and look at it now and think, well, yeah, that was quite obvious what was happening. And that's why, at this stage of my career, I've turned my attention to helping others on their journeys, because there's tons of other people going through very similar or much tougher even journeys than I went through. And leadership and that responsibility that it holds is tough. So I'm applying my skills, knowledge, experience to helping others on their own journey, and I get a huge amount of satisfaction from that.
So translating this experience, across the three continents and the various industries into what you're doing now, where do you see the magic moments, and where do you see the pitfalls, if I want to call it that?
The biggest experience that I had, I think I've just touched on it, was I'll put it this way: the highest level I got to in an organization, in terms of status, if you want to call it that, which had been my belief, climbing the ladder, I mentioned it earlier, following my father's footsteps, moving up the corporate ladder, was what society had taught me was the definition of success. And it took me a long time to work out that's not the only definition of success. There's a bunch more that you could throw into that. it's not just status and wealth. You know, those things are, you know, they're a byproduct of just what you do and the achievements that you've made in the workplace. But there's a whole bunch else, and I think some people can get really easily trapped into that slippery slope, and like I did. And when you go there, you know, so when I was at that moment, let's say I'd climbed my Everest, my little Everest in my little world. I'd kind of got there. I was probably earning as much as I'd ever earned in my life, and I was at the unhappiest I'd ever been. You know, I felt this lack of fulfillment, and just like what's this all about? I've been kind of working to get to this point, and then you create a new peak, and you want to keep going, and it's just unrelenting, and you never get there until you work out that high performance and happiness can coexist. And I didn't really work that out while I was still in the corporate world. I worked it out afterwards because I had the space to step out and to reflect and to go deep into my, you know, the inner architecture and work out exactly who I was, true identity, values, purpose, beliefs, a whole bunch of old beliefs that sit in there since childhood that just don't serve you well anymore. And you know, as a grown adult, that you don't need them. But you've got to do the work to find them, surface them, and then process them out of your system. That takes time, you know, and that took me probably a year and a half, 2 years post corporate world to really integrate back to who I truly am, because I think you lose your identity a little bit to the job and the company, you know, and it happens unconsciously. You don't deliberately do that, you know, it just sort of happens to you, and you end up at some point looking in the mirror and thinking, who the heck's looking back at me? Who is that guy? For me, it was like this Mr. Volkswagen looking back at you, Mr. Volkswagen Group, you know, everything that went with it. I didn't hate it, you know, I wasn't, but when I say I'm unhappy, I had this strong dissonance internally, and it was just sort of saying, well, you've been pulled so far away from who you truly are to be an effective leader and to be successful and to do all the things that you've done. That's great, but it's come at a cost. And what's beautiful is bringing yourself back into that and integrating back into that gives you a huge sense of, just sort of much more fulfilled as a human being instead of a human doing, which is what I'd kind of been for a couple of decades, you know. And so that's to answer your question, man. That's why I really spend a lot of time working with that. You don't have to, you know, I was fortunate. I had an opportunity to step out and have some time where I was able to reflect. Not everyone gets that opportunity. I did. I used that time to, you know, really well. And now I've realized that there's so many other people on that journey, whether you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, that you're on that, you'll climb to your Everest. And there's a way of doing that can achieve all that high performance without sacrificing your own sort of identity and self. You can do both. The joy is really in the journey. There's never a destination, and that's what I really learned. You know, that if you can start to enjoy the journey and be really present in those moments that you do get, that are so valuable, instead of just being distracted by your phone and emails and the headquarters phoning you at ungodly hours. You know, that stuff doesn't go away, but you can manage it. You know, you can manage it, and that's what I think I can offer to a lot of people, and that's where I've started to build a very successful practice now in terms of my own coaching and mentoring and team development work with other leaders.
So what is it that you offer as a coach that is different from that makes your style of coaching different?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I've never really thought what makes me different before. I think that's the one thing that coachees or clients, let's call them that, come to me for is because I've walked in their shoes. You know, I've been a CEO. I understand the pressures. I get it. You know, and there's some brilliant coaches out there, probably far better effective coaches. But they've not done that. You know, they've not sort of walked in the client's shoes. So whilst I'm still quite early on in my coaching career, I've been doing it a couple of years now, so there's obviously a lot more experienced coaches. I've got that advantage of having walked in the shoes. That's one thing that this is what clients say to me that they come to me for, because I get it, and I've walked the talk. So there's some credibility that I get for that. In terms of the coaching style, I like to think my coaching is not about necessarily frameworks and methods that I follow a structure for. I genuinely look at someone in front of me, if it's one-on-one, which I do quite a bit of. I look at someone in front of me and just try and meet them exactly where they are. And I have no idea sometimes what the topic's going to be in our coaching. Certainly in the first few sessions, often one leads to the next. But there's, if you just think about the wheel of life and you think about health, wealth, job, partners, relationships, money, whatever, there's always going to be topics that an individual's going to bring. So I don't specialize in any one particular thing, but I see that person sitting in front of me as someone who's perfectly capable of being able to work this out for themselves. They're creative, they're resourceful, they're very capable of me just holding a container for them and asking some powerful questions to surface the insights that they need. So I don't really, that's coaching. For me, that's what coaching is. Mentoring is quite different. I do quite a lot of mentoring as well. Mentoring, I tend to offer some more solutions, but I don't do that in coaching. In coaching, it's much deeper, that's that. The things that stick, the transformations that stick in coaching, don't come from someone telling you what to do. They come from you really finding it in yourself, and
Absolutely.
that's what I don't know where that sets me apart from. I don't think so. That sets me apart. I think that's what a good coach should do. I think there's probably a tendency these days. Seems like there's a lot of people moving into coaching. Coaching seems to be an industry that's really opening up. And for me, whilst I've got a lot of experience of leading people and managing people, I had no delusions of grandeur that I would be a really great coach. I went off and I did my time getting a certification. I chose, as I tend to do, I chose the longest, hardest, most expensive coaching certification to go and do, but I was really invested in that, not so much as for my clients as much as it was for me to really learn. And one of the biggest things I had to unlearn, I think, Banya, is I had to unlearn that bit that we just talked about telling, that temptation to solve and tell, and because that's what a lot of leadership had taught me to do. That's what I was paid to do for a few decades, is to in some of that, sometimes that was critical. You didn't always have the time to coach your employees through these moments, and often they didn't want that. They just needed a solution and to move faster. So having to unlearn some of that as a coach was probably my biggest challenge in becoming a coach. And I'm still, that's still work in progress, but I'm much better at doing that today than I was when I started out. So so I think there's a few things there that I don't coach the problem, I coach the person. That sums it up.
Fantastic. Could you share any transformation that you have successfully been able to make, or without obviously divulging the client's name or anything, but some of your transformation work that you have been able to do, success stories that you have had?
In coaching, do you mean, or just
throughout, in your entire career, so far, from your corporate life to your coaching or to the current work that you're doing?
So I would say, I'll give you two examples. One's a sort of corporate one, but then one's a personal one. So corporate one, I was right in the eye of the storm of one of the biggest corporate scandals in history out of anyone, with the company that I was working for, and I won't go into all the details there because I don't want to dredge all that up again, but it was huge, and I went into that while I was in Africa, and it was still going on when I arrived in Australia as well. So I had to deal with it in 2 different countries that have got 2 different legal systems, 2 different sets of standards, and 2 different political sort of systems, and 2 different customers, quite frankly. So it was a huge crisis that cost billions of euros in terms of fines, let alone the cost of what it did to employees and their belief in the company that they work for, and for clients that have bought the products that the company was selling. Working through crisis, there isn't many bigger crises in the world that have happened. And I was the country manager, so I was the CEO of that market. So the kind of buck stopped with me to make sure that I shored up. Firstly, our employees. I talked about that right at the beginning. Servant sort of nature that I have, to make sure they were okay, because I was rocked by it. I was rocked by this. I was thinking, wow, this is the company that I work for. Is this align to my ethics and my values? And it didn't. I had to work through that and think, well, is this the right place for me to still be? And I knew that every other employee would be feeling something similar. So we had to, because you don't get much from the headquarters. There was overseas headquarters, and there's not much guidance. You're kind of there, especially in Australia when we're so far out of the time zones. So you had to deal with that. It was expected of the local leadership to manage the local teams. Was dealing with that, dealing with the legal teams. My first meeting in Australia was straight from the airport, straight to our lawyer's office in the city. I didn't even make it to my own office. I was straight there. So that's how deep we were into it here. So yeah, shoring up the employees first to make them feel okay. We didn't do anything wrong. It's nothing that was created here. Nothing it was all out of our control. Now we just got to manage ourselves and our customers and our stakeholders locally. So that was a huge amount of work. Years it took actually for the ripple effect of all of that to sort of move through, and arguably there's still some smaller ripples still around. So that's hard. That takes a huge sort of toll on you as an individual leader, because you really feel the weight of that on your shoulders, and it's pretty brutal, even though it's not something that you created yourself. But I survived those moments, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about when I was in Africa. I have got some deep resources and resilience and courage, if you like. I think that I can look back on and think, well, that they got me through, but they took a toll. They took a bite out of me, no doubt about it. My own well-being, time with people that I should have been spending time with was sacrificed. And I regret those moments. I look back at that now and I regret them. That's a huge transformation that we went through, because we had to survive that. We had to employees, customers, stakeholders. We had to get that all back on track, and let alone the financials of the company. Suddenly the working capital was taking absolutely no time, and we were well, what are we going to do? Kind of similar thing happened managing through COVID. When COVID hit in 2020, I was here in Australia, and suddenly, 1 minute operations were fine, the next minute they were literally closed, and it was a devastating impact on everyone. Obviously, it was a major health crisis, but you've got to deal with that, and you've got to deal with keeping your company afloat at the same time. And all that uncertainty was just incredible at that time. So managing through, being the CEO of a company during that COVID period when it first hit the world was incredibly challenging. So there's a couple of major sort of corporate, let's call it corporate or pandemic sort of crisis that I went through, and those were back to back. We just finished the corporate one, and then the pandemic came. So there's a lot of it felt like it was pretty relentless. I'd say the second major transformation, and I said it would be a personal one, is just how I've had that opportunity to completely sort of reinvent myself in the second phase of my career. I've done the corporate thing and climbed up there, and that gives you this, you're institutionalized into these companies, and it can be quite safe. It's hugely challenging, but it's quite safe. And now I've set up on my own as a solopreneur. And setting up my own practice, and I've met collaborating with other organizations and building building my own little sort of leadership development ecosystem over the last couple of years. That's been a huge transformation. You know, it's been lots of re-educating myself, unlearning things I just talked about, getting certifications in certain areas to give me the right to be practicing in this area of coaching, counselling, and mentoring. So the reinvention of you know, Paul 2.0 has been a huge transformation, and probably the most pleasing part of that for me, anyway, is that, you know, this is what I talk about: high performance and happiness. I'm now working. It's still busy, still got all daily stresses, still got life going on happening, but I feel so much more integrated into self again. So I don't have two identities now. I don't have the corporate Paul and the Paul. I've just got Paul, and he's doing stuff that he really loves every day, and that's a big change for me personally over the last couple of years that I thoroughly enjoy. So when I bounce out of bed in the morning and get about my work, you know, it's very different. It's always going to be some new things, some new people that I meet, and some new challenges. Coaching's just such a fantastic, rewarding industry, and I've got some volunteering work that I do as well that's very rewarding. So yeah, I feel much more fulfilled today than perhaps I did doing a arguably a sort of much bigger, higher profile, more responsibility sort of job that I had. But yeah, that didn't eventually, anyway, it sort of ran out of road for me. I was needed to do something else, so I did.
So, you know, I find that you have faced quite a lot of challenging moments. You have also had, now that you have found your island where you know how it is and how you're going about it, you feel more calmer. If that's how I get it, you know, when you're talking, I feel that you're feeling more calmer, more at ease with whatever you're doing. How did you sustain your energy through all those challenges? And even now, how do you go about it?
That's a great question. Truth is, I didn't, Dr. B. I didn't. I don't think it's possible to sustain it always. You know, I had moments. I got stressed. I made mistakes. I had anxiety. You know, I was stressed out. I'd lost sight of this identity, and I compromised my values. And I wondered, what's this all about? You know, what is my purpose? What am I doing? It's hard. It's super hard. And I didn't really have anyone, because that role of a CEO, that's quite a lonely space you occupy up there. You know, there's no one, because you've got to be seen always as being, you know, someone who's, you know, just putting on a brave front. Because if you look like you're you know, if you look like you're wobbling, that's going to be read across the organization, and they'll start to wobble as well. You know, so you've got to step up and, you know, and put on this act almost sort of yeah, it's a mask. Exactly. It's a suit or whatever, a mask, and you do that, and you know, you have to do that every day, and you have to work really hard at that, and that takes an energy that is extraordinary, and that reservoir of energy, by the time you get home, arguably to the people the way you want to put most of your energy to, because you love them the most, it's depleted. You know, so you lose on both fronts. So yeah, I didn't always do it, but there are things that you can do, obviously, and I've really I think I've pretty much tried everything. So whether it's exercise is great, because that helps you sleep better, which is super important. I never respected sleep really as a up until probably 2 or 3 years ago. I never really respected just how important sleep was. Hydration, nutrition, you know, I've done all the, you know, to do all the sort of get the big foundational building blocks in place like those, and you'll start to feel better. But then trying things like meditation, I started going to yoga class, doing some meditation. I wasn't good at meditation because I realized later on that I actually have ADHD, and meditating is really difficult when you got ADHD. But I didn't know I had that, so it's kind of, wasn't able to explain it. My sort of brain was wired, but yeah, I don't know, just sort of reading and learning and talking to experts in the field around, you know, what's going on emotionally, as well as the cognitive sort of wiring, helped me really understand myself. And once I can do that, and that's why I think I'm in in such a good position now to help others, because I've been to my sort of rock bottom, if you like, and felt that, and I've put it back together again in a way that's sustainable now, that wasn't there before. And I think that's what the trap that we all fall into when you're in that high pressure role, where feels like there's no time at all, and the pressure is super high all the time to do those sort of things, and so you just keep going, and going, and then that's why you hear about this sort of words like burnout and so on. So I don't think I reached a point where I was burnt out. I never used that word, but when I look back at it, I think, well, I was definitely going in that direction. I was fortunate that I was able to jump off the sort of the bandwagon when I did, because I probably would have ended up in that space. And that's why you see it a lot now, and there's so much more being talked about in the workplace around well-being and mental health, and and I know some people still sort of in the corporate world roll their eyes at that, and but it's a strategic imperative that you create that in your organization. It's and if you see it as strategically as important as your P&L and your customer index and your employees, if you see it as important as that, then you'll start to win. But unfortunately, quite a lot of leadership don't really. It's almost like a nice to have, and someone in HR will take care of that. And we'll put a little program out and tick a box. It's not seen as so strategically important. And certainly coming up with the generations that are following along behind me, they're a lot more demanding in this space than I ever was, and my peer group were coming through the ranks. You kind of just put up and shut up was kind of what I experienced. So I think we're on the right tracks, but we've got a long way to go.
Yep, I totally agree on that. With workplace well-being being a major concern, I think right now it is much more deeper rooted in the organization structure. It is more deeper rooted in how work is designed, how the job is described, and what the position talks about. And that's what is more important than just ticking boxes with some employee assistance program or something like that. I think there's more to it than just
100%.
Just
totally agree.
With that, I think we come to an end. And this has been such a rich conversation, a very, very rich conversation. Your wisdom and the way you have described your journey is, I think, a learning by itself. How would you like my audience to get in touch with you?
So my website is www.drivetalent.com.au. And you can find me there, and my email is paul@drivetalent.com.au. I'd love to hear from any of your listeners, Dr. B, and just catch up with them and learn about their stories, their challenges, and see whether there's any opportunity to collaborate.
Lovely. I absolutely thank you so much for sparing your time and for sharing all the valuable wisdom that you have shared with us. I'm sure this is going to be a big help to my audience here. Thank you again, Paul,
I do
for being
hope so.
with us.
Yeah, it's been a great privilege, and I enjoyed the time with you, Dr. B. Thanks for having me.